You're watching Cable 2. You're watching Cable 2.
To the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Board of Education meeting this September 12th, 2017. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation. If you will please stand and remain standing.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we pause to give you thanks this day. We thank you for so many things that we take for granted. Lord, we lift up to you those who are facing devastating hurricanes in Texas and Florida and Georgia, Alabama, all of those states that are affected. Lord, just lift up those folks, lift up those first responders. Lord, we ask that you be with us tonight, and always, Lord, help us to do what's right for our students, always going back to our core values as a district and staying student-centered in all that we do as adults. Lord, we thank you for the many blessings that you give us, and we thank you for this community and the great partnerships that we have. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. We have one item, one change to the agenda tonight. We have one item that we need to remove, and that is under discussion items. Item C, the Finance Committee report. Finance Committee did not meet today, and so we will not have a report this evening. Do not believe there's any other changes to the agenda, so do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Barr. Second, Mr. Singletary. All in favor? Wonderful. Thank you. So this evening we have a special recognition. I'll call them Bruce and Shirley, I believe. Our CTE dynamic duo.
Chairman Jones, Dr. Emery, and board members, it is our great pleasure to recognize one of our very own, Vicki Wheeler, for receiving the State Award for the 2016-17 Career Guidance Professional of the Year for the Northwest Region. The Northwest Region has 14 counties, and Vicki was recognized at our CTE Summer Conference as being the regional winner, which puts her in the running for the statewide title, which will be determined in October at the Career Development Conference in Boone. Vicki brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to Winston-Salem and has been instrumental in building business partners for our academies and organizing monthly meetings for our career development coordinators. Please join us in wishing Vicki the best as she competes for the statewide title.
We'd also like to recognize Mark. Her husband is in the audience tonight. I'm glad he could be with us for this recognition as well.
Next, we have public comments on agenda items. I have one speaker signed up, Rhonda May.
Good evening, Chairwoman Jones, the board, Dr. Emery. I am Rhonda Mays, a school social worker in the district, serving as full-time release president for Forsyth County Association of Educators. Tonight, I would like to speak concerning the district's 2016-17 data. First and foremost, thank you to all the educators, students, families, and community members who directly and indirectly impacted these results. One thing we know for sure is that no one was a lone ranger in order to make it happen. It is good to see that growth is being highlighted and acknowledged, and not just the school grade. We know that there are so many other factors to consider when looking at our schools. The first matter that we are working with is the fact that we are working with children and not robots. That's first and foremost. You know, they're unpredictable. We don't know what they will do or respond to interventions, as well as lesson plans that you may take hours to create. It will take everyone continuing to work together to build the relationships that matter. When students, families, and educators feel that they are welcomed, free to teach, learn, and make mistakes, they are able to be more relaxed, comfortable, and less anxious. In environments that are tense, stressed, overcritical, there is a great hindrance to learning and or exploration. I am looking forward to the district and Forsyth County Association of Educators working together to improve the learning environments for our students and working to continue to grow our students in this district. 11 schools came off that low performing list this time. Let's work to get the remainder of them off. We have a foundation we can strengthen and build upon. Thank you again, board and Dr. Emery, for your commitment to our students and educators in this district. Thank you.
We will move right into our discussion items this evening, and first, we'll call on Andy Kraft to discuss the data for 16-17 overview.
Madam Chair, Dr. Emery, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to share with you our 2017 data results. If I may, I was a little disappointed that we're not at Paisley tonight. That's a school that's growing. I thought that was a nice metaphor, backdrop for us, so I am happy to talk to you about our growth that we have. So these are the 2016-17 school year results. I remind you that this is a reflection of the READY accountability model. READY is not an acronym. We're used to many of the acronyms in the accountability world, EOG and EOC. READY is simply what the state has named the accountability model that is used to measure our schools. And this includes the school performance grades that are assigned to each school, and I'll be a little more in-depth about how those school performance grades are calculated. The EOGs are administered in grades 3 through 8. They are administered in both ELA and math, and that is the measure for our elementary and middle schools, as well as a 5th and 8th grade EOG science test. In our high schools, we administer 3 EOCs, Math 1, Biology, and English 2. And in our high schools, there's also some other measures that include the ACT, a measure of college readiness, ACT work keys, a measure of workplace readiness, as well as the cohort graduation rate and math course rigor. All of those measures are combined to get our performance indicator. They are scored on a level of 1 through 5. Level 3, 4, and 5 is deemed grade level proficient, while levels 4 and 5 are college and career ready. The old AMO targets you may have been accustomed to are slightly different in that we only have a participation target now. Every subgroup on every test must meet this 95% participation target. So in addition to our proficiency targets, there are also growth indicators. Growth it falls into one of 3 categories: exceeded expected growth, met expected growth, or did not meet expected growth. And this is a measure of where students were predicted to perform relative to their peers and where they actually performed. So here is an overview that you get to see of just proficiency. This doesn't indicate growth, but it does show you some change over time over the last 3 years. I direct your attention to the bottom row. And in general, if we look at overall scores, we're relatively flat from year to year. We are at 53.6% of our students reaching grade level proficiency overall. But the story is different, though, when we look at our individual scores. So if you look at math, it's a slight decrease, but really flat. Reading, we're exactly flat. That's interesting. Science is down. Now, last year we celebrated an uptick in science. We'd like to see ourselves be able to go back and maintain that. We're above the 14-15 level, but below the 15-16 level. But the next two, I would say, are our two largest areas of celebration, and that is Math 1. We are at 62.6%. You see that's a dramatic increase over the previous year's 55%. And in biology, that 58% represents 3 years in a row of an increase in our biology scores. And I'll show you how that compares to the state in just a second. But we're particularly proud of 3 years in a row of growth there in biology. English 2, relatively flat. We're up a little bit in English 2. All right. So overall, how do we compare to the state? And you see that presented there for you, both the grade level proficiency scores as well as the college and career readiness measure. We outperformed Durham. We performed similarly to Guilford, and we were outperformed by Charlotte Meck and Wake County schools. So let's break it down in terms of the specific tests. If you look at reading in grades 3 through 8, this provides a comparison for you with the other school districts, the other large urban school districts in the state. And you can see that in reading grades 3 through 8, for our grade level proficiency, we're similar to Cumberland, similar to Guilford. We outperformed Durham, but we were outperformed by Charlotte and Wake. The story is similar in math, grades 3 through 8, where we slightly outperformed Cumberland County. We're almost in line with Guilford, but Charlotte and Wake outperformed us, and we outperformed Durham. Science, grade 5 and 8, as I said last year, in the 15-16 school year, we saw a big bump here, but we took a slight decline in the 16-17 school year. Here we outperformed Durham. We were outperformed, though, by Cumberland, Wake, and Guilford. In English 2, which we talked about earlier, high school saw some of our largest increases. In English 2, we outperformed Cumberland. We outperformed Durham. We're very similar to Guilford, but we were outperformed by Charlotte and Wake again. In Math 1, where we saw our largest increase, something we're particularly excited about, you can see that here we've outperformed Cumberland and Durham, and we're gaining on Guilford, who outperformed us, and Charlotte and Wake outperformed us as well. Okay? So, I want you to look closely at this. This is an area of celebration for us. So biology, which saw a 3-year increase, that is a year-over-year increase for the last 3 years, we outperformed everyone except Wake County, and we're kind of right on their heels for Wake County. So we're particularly happy about the outcomes that we've had in our biology courses. This is a great trend, and that's something for us to celebrate. As I said, there are other high school indicators besides just the EOCs. Those include the ACT measures, college readiness, work keys, which is a workplace readiness, math course 3, did you take and pass math 3, the cohort graduation rates as well. So you see where we stand there at 58.4% of our students meeting the minimum requirement for the UNC system on the ACT. 77.6% of our students meeting the requirement for the ACT work keys. And if you look at how we compare to the rest of the state, we outperform everyone in that measure except Wake. That's positive. Most all school districts throughout the state meet that Math 3 requirement. Our 4-year cohort graduation rate, I'll show that trend to you in a second, but it went up again, which is positive for us. We're still aiming for that 90%, and we're working on that. We're on track to get there. Our 5-year cohort graduation rate is at 87.1%. So this is something I appreciate. Ms. Mays mentioned this a second ago. So this shows you the percentage of our schools that met, exceeded, or did not meet expected growth. And what you see clearly here is that over the past 4 years, this past year was our highest year, our best year, in terms of the schools that met and exceeded expected growth. 32% of our schools exceeded expected growth last year. You see that's an increase from 11% the year before. That's the kind of increase we want to see, and we're very, very pleased to see that. And again, that's our best performance in the past 4 years. So you might ask, well, how does that compare to the rest of the state? And here is the answer to that question. Our growth is, I'd say, tied for first with Guilford County there. We had 32% of our schools exceed expected growth, as did Guilford. You see Charlotte Meck at 27%, Cumberland at 23%, and Wake at 14%. This is a trend for us that's going in the right direction, and this is how we're going to improve our outcomes overall. So what does that mean? I gave you the percentages, but here are the specific number of schools. In the 15-16 school year, we only had 8 schools that exceeded expected growth. That reflects that 11%. This past year, we had 23 schools exceed expected growth. That's the direction that we want to go in, so we can be very pleased with the outcome in terms of growth. In part, because of our changes in growth, we had fewer schools on the low-performing list. We went from 32 low-performing schools as defined by the state to 23 low-performing schools. Now, if you are exceeding expected growth, that will get you off the list. If you increase your school performance grade to a C or higher, that will get you off that low-performing list. So we're very pleased to see that several of our schools did that this past year. I'll remind you then that school performance grades are assigned to schools, and they are made up of 80% proficiency is factored into that grade, and 20% of that grade is growth. So take a look at how we did in 2016 compared to 2017. We had the same number of A schools year over year, but what you see is fewer D schools and more B and C schools. So that's, again, a trend that reflects some of our increased growth. You notice we added 2 F schools, but for the most part, our schools are going in the right direction with our school performance grades. Okay, so how does this relate to the 3 goals that we've set for ourselves? I'll remind you that those 3 goals are to get 90% of our 3rd graders reading on or above grade level, to get 90% of our students graduating in 4 years, and to close the achievement gap between our subgroups by 10 percentage points. So let me try to give you a picture of how we're doing on those 3 areas. First of all, our 3rd grade reading. If we look at this, I've shown you a longitudinal look at this from the 12-13 school year through the 16-17 school year. We'd like to see better numbers. In the 12-13 school year, our proficiency for 3rd grade reading was at 52.8, and in this past 16-17 school year, it was exactly the same place. So we're relatively flat in terms of our 3rd grade reading. You can see that our Asian students and our white students have some of the highest proficiencies, while our African American students and our Hispanic students have some of the lower proficiencies. There are other subgroups besides racial and ethnic subgroups. That includes our economically disadvantaged students, our limited English proficiency students, and our students with disabilities who are performing at lower levels. You see in the past year, our economically disadvantaged students were at 36.8, our LAP students were at 21.8, and our students with disabilities were at 29.8. So this graph is designed to show you our goal and our progress towards that goal. And I think graphically it shows you that we are flat year over year, and it also demonstrates the achievement gap, that persistent achievement gap that we are battling, and we're going to have to overcome that achievement gap in order to reach our goal of 90%. Our 2nd goal, as you remember, is our goal to get 90% of our students to graduate in 4 years. And you can see that, this is an example of where the community has come behind us, a lot of hard work in our schools. So from 2008, where we had a 70.8% graduation rate, to today in 2017, where we have an 86.5% graduation rate, this is something we can be very proud of and say that a lot of what we're doing is working. We're aiming for a 90% graduation rate next year, and this has definitely been a positive trend for us that we're encouraged by. The story is slightly different when we break it down by subgroups. Our Hispanic students graduated at the lowest rate, and last year it was at 78.3. Now I show you there, I help you recognize that that is an increase over the previous year from 75.3 to 78%, so it's going in the right direction. But if we're going to get an overall graduation rate of 90%, we need to improve outcomes for all students in this area. And you see African American students as well at 86.3, our white students at 90.4. Our final goal is to close the achievement gap between our subgroups, and we want to close that gap by 10 percentage points while increasing the performance of all subgroups. So let's take a look at how we're doing at closing the achievement gap. This is one way for us to look at it. I recognize it's a little busy, and I'll show this to you in a different way in just a second. But overall, what you'll recognize here, because the achievement is not increasing for these subgroups, the gap is remaining fairly constant. Now, the story is different on a school-by-school basis, but for the district data, our gap has remained fairly consistent. If we look at it in terms of reading EOG, this is grades 3 through 8, you'll notice that we have about a 40% gap, and that 40% gap has been persistent with us since the 2012-13 school year through last school year. On the chart that you see in front of you, Hispanic students are outperformed by our African American students in reading grades 3 through 8. Yet there's a large gap between our minority students and our white students in that area. English 2, the story is similar. We've seen, it's gone back and forth between our African American and Hispanic students there, but there's been a persistent gap of about 30 to 40 percentage points in English 2. In math, EOG, these are grades 3 through 8 as well. We've seen a similar persistent achievement gap, although the Hispanic students are outperforming our African American students in math, whereas in English, our African American students outperformed our Hispanic students. Nonetheless, we've seen a persistent gap here over time in our math 3 through 8 EOG scores. So this is a good way to look at Math 1. Now this is an area to celebrate here. That's a large increase that we experienced in the 2016-17 school year. It was a large increase both for our white students as well as for our minority students. But because the increase was larger for our minority students, we did experience some gap closure here in Math 1. This is the kind of trend that we would like to replicate throughout the district in our other tested areas. Science grades 5 through 8, we mentioned last year that nice bump that we got from 14-15 to 15-16. Well, that leveled out a little bit for us, and so we were not able to continue our gap closure in grades 5 and 8 science. In biology, this is an interesting story as well. All of our students increased. That's a positive trend. We're happy to see that. Yet, because all of our students increased at roughly the same percentage, we didn't see gap closure, but we did see increases in proficiency, which is positive. So that tells you a story about our gap results. There's one last thing that I wanted to bring to you this evening, and that is our summer school results. As you remember, we started running summer school last summer, and then we did it again this past summer. And these are good numbers. These are far better than what we were experiencing when we were contracting our summer school work out to others. We had 760 third grade students that attended summer school. Some of those kids had a good cause exemption and some of those did not. 670 specifically did not have a good cause exemption, so they needed to be retested. So of those 670 students at the end of summer school, 131 of those 670 students met the Read to Achieve requirements. They became proficient. Now that's positive for us. Now we recognize that not all of those 670 students were there for all of summer school. We can't quite take credit for all of those accomplishments. But we looked at 529 students who were there for more than 12 days, and of those 529 students, 106 of them became proficient, and we're proud of that. That's a 18.6% pass rate, which is a slight increase from the 2015 summer outcomes. So our summer school is trending in the right direction and getting good outcomes. So this data was shared with all the principals in the district, and we reminded them that we have some imperatives because we want to continue the good work and improve on it. And so we have imperatives designed to get increased outcomes in the 17-18 school year. Those include a balanced literacy approach to reading instruction, utilizing our professional learning teams, creating quality school improvement plans that are reviewed by the instructional superintendents, creating discipline goals, gap goals, and the implementation of the multi-tiered system of support. And the last item, which will help all of you get some further understanding of the outcomes we had in 2016-17, how that compares to previous years, is a data dashboard. All of you will get access to this data dashboard tomorrow, and we're happy to answer any questions, create any reports that you like. But what I would do is direct your attention to that data dashboard, so when you have questions, you might glance there first to say, can I answer my own questions through that data dashboard? I think you're going to like this tool. When we presented this to the principals, they were particularly excited because they were able to answer a lot of questions that they had. So what I've done here for you is just giving you a couple of screenshots of what you're going to see when you look in the data dashboard. These are the headings, kind of your table of contents. We have student achievement and growth, much of which I just went over for you. At this point, we also have student attendance, discipline, and graduation. It's important for our schools to track attendance as well as discipline. And you're going to see those other features there that are labeled in black to be filled in shortly by us. But we're particularly excited. What you'll see, for example, this shows Diggs Latham over time, 2003, all the way back 2003 to 2017, grade level proficiency as well as college and career ready results. So again, you can kind of answer some of those questions for yourself if you're curious about how particular schools are doing. What we've done here is provided for you a graphic way to look at how the various subgroups are performing on the tests. And you can choose the test, and then you can choose the subgroups that you'd like to look at. The different color of the bars there represent levels 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the test. We hope you find that helpful. Our schools have been pretty excited to get a chance to use this. Cohort graduation rate is presented here for you. And so if you're interested in just, how did a particular subgroup or gender do? How did our Hispanic males do? You'll be able to answer that question as well for the district, for particular schools, and for different years as well. You can select all those features, all those options. And finally, you can cross some of those different variables to answer some questions about when they graduated and what their graduation rates were. So hopefully those tools are helpful for you, and that data answers some of your questions about how we did in the 16-17 school year. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have several questions. One is, will we be tracking the children who went to Freedom Schools this year as far as what happens to them when they go back to their regular classrooms? In the same way we're monitoring summer school students. And it's not just what did they do at the end of the summer, it's what happens in the year they go back to school. And on this dashboard, is there going to be included the teacher working condition surveys? Because one of the things that Ms. Mays brought up so well, and she does, is how important climate is. And that you tend to pay attention to what you measure. And so if you're not measuring climate as majorly important, it's easy for schools to think we'll get to that later. And the one other question I had about imperatives, and I think they're important, is we have speakers who come and talk to us, like Ron Clark, where they really talk about creativity. And my question is, where in our imperatives are we making sure that people are given the freedom to try things knowing that all of them won't succeed, but that it's important? So I don't know whether there's a place on the data that just says, hey, what are you willing to try this year? And not across the board. But that individual schools try some new things.
Thanks. Yeah, so 3 good questions. So let me begin with the last one first, and that is there room for creativity? So we say it's kind of non-negotiable that you focus on closing the gaps. How you close the gap, right? There's room for creativity there. And you say, I'm doing this strategy in order to close the gap, and it's been shown to be effective, and we're going to encourage people to continue to do that. It's kind of non-negotiable to focus on these things like discipline goals, gap goals, and such, but you can certainly be creative in how you address those areas, if that answers that question. You asked about, will teacher working conditions be reported? The answer is yes. As I say, this is the table of contents in front of you here, and that would fall under perceptions of school. That's not in there yet, but we do plan to add that.
That will be in there.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, but, okay, what I would like them is, I would like to be able to, what I think is important is to look not separately, but at the same time, what happens with teacher working conditions and perceptions of schools, as well as how do they, quote, perform? Because my guess is those things matter a lot.
And your last question had to do with students in Freedom Schools. And although that's not part of the Ready accountability model, certainly we have those students' data, and we could put that together in a report.
And I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Are there other questions from the board?
Questions of
Right here.
Andy? Oh, Robert, sorry.
First, I'd like to say I'm encouraged by the data, but when you look at the tremendous growth for Math 1 and biology, I mean, can we just speak to that? What did we do differently as a district? Was it some particular strategy, or was it something just over time that gave us those results?
Sure, and I deferred the answer to that question to some of the program managers. And so I went to our math program manager, and she was particularly excited to see a renewed focus on the standards. When we're writing lesson plans and delivering lessons, that those align with the standard course of study. So they really look closely at the standards. Not, what do I think we should be teaching? What does the documents from the state actually say that we should be teaching? And that was part of her explanation for why our math scores had the bump. Now our biology scores, you'll see, has been a year over year, and what they're talking about is some of the groundwork that's laid in elementary and middle school science that they're now beginning to reap the benefits of in high school, and so that was part of the explanation that I heard from the science department in the answer to that question.
So you're saying just a refocus in Math 1 on the standards just really made a difference, basically?
That's right, a renewed focus to make sure that our instruction aligns with what's being tested, right? So if the standards say this is what we're supposed to teach, we make sure that that is what we actually deliver in the classroom.
Okay.
So if I could piggyback on that, I think that those program managers would also tell you that they would really compliment the high school principals for making sure teachers have taken advantage of the training. There's been enormous training in these content areas, and I think our focus on accountability and the imperatives has gotten people's attention. They know that someone's going to ask, what are you doing with this? And so we did get clear indication from all of our high school program managers that they had increased attendance by teachers in the training. We believe we see better lesson plans, which is also an imperative, and incorporation of these into those lesson plans. The other thing I want to compliment our high school principals on in this area is what may not seem courageous, but the courageous move to be diplomatic and move teachers who are the best teachers into some of these tested areas. So sometimes as we get better in our craft, we think we're going to go teach all AP bio or all the higher level math, and I think it's been intriguing to see how principals have created some combinations. So if you'll teach 2 sections of this, I'll give you 2 set. So again, making sure the people who are getting results for kids in those classes are actually the ones teaching them. And some of that has happened mid-year. So I would tell you we hire a new teacher and we're not so sure will they or will they not, and so sometimes courses get changed in second semester based on first semester results. So I think their ability to look at the data, and I think what will happen with this dashboard is while right now it's static data, as it becomes more on-time, real, virtual data will inform those decisions in a way that we can use benchmarks and first semester kinds of grades to say, wait a minute, wow, this teacher over here is, really getting a great result with our Hispanic females. Maybe we need to make sure in second semester. Does that make sense? So I think that in talking with high school principals, there's been a lot more flexibility to really rethink, whereas the old mentality was, well, next year we'll fix it.
Right. And I think that does make sense if I can ask another question. Because you gave us a lot of good information, status, statistics, bar graphs, all of that. But help me see once again, just summarize for me, how did we do with closing the gap?
The answer is it depends on the subject that we tested. In the elementary and middle school level, we were flat and did not see much gap closure. In the high school, we did see some gap closure, particularly in biology and math 1. And then you can take a deeper look at that into particular schools. We expected schools to set a 10% increase for their African American students and Hispanic students in proficiency. Fully 50% of our high schools met those goals, right? So if we see all subgroups increase, we won't necessarily see a gap closure, right? But we're going in the right direction. And so, so does that answer your question? Elementary and middle school, we're fairly flat and have not seen dramatic gap closure. High school, we're going in the right direction. We have seen some gap closure. And then the other answer is it depends school to school. Some schools have seen better improvements in gap closure than others.
Are we making sure that we give the teachers that are really seeing results? Are they part of the Teacher Academy, you know, in some way? And are we picking their brains to understand what kind of specific strategies can they name that they did differently that really they think made the difference? I mean, whether it's aligning the content to the standard and back to the test, you know, that, but what strategy, was it using technology in a certain way? Was it using a book this way? Was it doing, I don't know, specific things that they can say, I think these 3 things really made a difference in my classroom and why I saw. I mean, are we kind of picking their brains to know that?
The Academy is the perfect platform for that.
Right.
And of course, those teachers were selected not just based on a test score outcome, but that was a large part of looking at that. And so I think, you know, I think our biggest challenge there will be how do we continue to grow that, because there are a lot more folks out there getting results than we were able to include in the Academy. So how do we continue to grow that? But yes, so even the professional development that we can offer within the district, and Dr. Patsy's going to talk about the Title I plan. One of the things that our instructional superintendents have done beautifully this year with Title I, which is part of you get a lot of credit for why do we keep getting these contracts. One of the things that we really try to focus on is what are you doing with these dollars that's sustainable? So how do you invest inside the school and create sustainability versus contracting? So I think that some of the training that folks will be doing inside schools by those very folks who are getting results are other ways that we use our resources that I think will help us get a broader result. The model particularly, and Amy and Don, if y'all want to comment, in my mind, particularly the professional development pathway of the Academy, as well as those model classrooms where you may have only 20 teachers who are teacher leaders that are model classrooms, but the number of teachers that can go and visit and take advantage of and learn from those is exponentially greater than that. So the ability to expose teachers that go see it, have a conversation afterwards is really important. The other thing I would tell you is leaders. So we had a press conference last week, and the big question the media wanted to know with the principals is how, what do you think that is? And it was really remarkable to hear 5 different people in 5 different ways underscore a relationship, right? So there is a lot about differentiating academics and how do we meet student needs, but at the heart of that was if you don't know your students and you don't know what they need, you don't know what the backstory is, you don't have the ability to really tailor to their specific needs. So I think that's been exciting too, is for leaders to have the ability amongst themselves to talk about. I would invite you all. I've heard lots of, I've already been to South Fork before school started. I want to sit down with her and have a, so folks know where they know where those pockets are, Robert, that you were asking, who did get gap closure. I want to go see, what did RJR do this year that they got that big, and how. So I think folks it's been exciting to see them self-motivated to go seek out and find where those places are that have seen some real success.
And I think you kind of went to where I wanted to go. I mean, would it be possible for us, maybe it's a dashboard, to get a list of those schools that really did an exceptional job in closing the gap?
I think that's easy for us
okay.
to do.
All right. And then maybe even highlight a couple of those schools and be able, I guess, as a board, just to see them in real time and say, hey, how did you do this? I know they talk to the instructional superintendents, but just for us to kind of get a good feel of that. So.
I have a lot of people to really be interested in our 3rd grade reading. Can you kind of explain where we actually are in our 3rd grade reading?
Sure. The 3rd grade reading is an area we've been flat over the last few years. I think that this is probably the best way that I can present it for you here. we have not seen the type of increase in our third grade reading that we would have hoped to have seen. The bar graph on the left-hand side there shows you from 2012 to 2013 school year, all the way through this past school year, we've hovered in the 50% range in terms of number of students, the percentage of students who are scoring a level 3, 4, or 5 on that EOG. So roughly what we've seen is about 50% of our kids proficient using this measure. And that number hasn't changed dramatically. And if we break it down by various subgroups, it's fairly steady as well. Our largest subgroups are our white students, our African American students, and our Hispanic students. And you can see in every one of those cases we've seen a 1 to 4% either rise or fall. But for the it's flat over the years. And so that hopefully provides an answer to your question in terms of how are we doing a third grade reading. Frankly, it's been flat over the last 4 or 5 years here.
Do you see one group that seems to be benefiting a little more? I mean, when you say flat,
sure,
is there one group that seems to be benefiting a little more than maybe another group?
It's difficult to identify one group over another that's showing improvement, but we do see some schools that are showing improvements over others. And that's a trend that's exciting that we have to, similar to other things we've discussed, identify what is working in those schools and how are they getting those increases. So if we look district-wide at various subgroups, the answer is no. Their performance remains fairly constant, but if we look school by school, we see some different outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
This is my last question. Can you go back and show us, I guess, the graph or information on the students with disabilities and how are they doing over time? Have we
Specifically for third grade reading?
Oh, it can just be general, whichever one you want to choose, third grade or, for example, I'm looking at something that says gaps over time, subgroups.
Sure, okay. Well, so what you see right here is students with disabilities and their performance in third grade reading. And you see that in the 12-13 school year, 25.5% of the students with disabilities were proficient, whereas in the 2016-17 school year, 29.8%. That's a fairly significant rise, about a 4 percentage point rise, which is encouraging. That's the direction that we want to go. Thanks, Sam. So that's an example, particularly just for third grade reading. Does that answer your question, or is there more to the?
Well, that's good.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, I did have a question also. Are other large urban districts in the state, are any of them making significant strides on the gap, achievement gap?
Yeah, the achievement gap has been a persistent problem across the state. And when we do see strides made in one year, typically we see them fall back in the following year. So the answer is no. I wish I could point to a particular district that over a 3 or 4 year period have had significant gap closures. But there are years and grade levels and particular schools that experience those. But in terms of particularly large urban districts, the achievement gap has been persistent. And it's not unique to the state of North Carolina either. This is a nationwide issue that deserves the attention it's getting and we need to solve.
Mr. Johnson.
I was wondering what percent of our students are sight learners and what percent of our students are oral learners. The reason I'm saying this is that I've been playing a little game with my daughter. She's been trying to teach me some Spanish, and I've told her over and over again that I don't learn by this orally. I need to see the words, you know, and she keeps trying to pound it in. And it dawned on me, I said, you know, I am truly a sight learner. You know, once I see something, I can remember. But if I don't see it, you can almost forget it. And I'm just wondering, is that the case with a lot of other kids that we have in school?
Mr. Johnson, I appreciate that question because what I've reported here are outcomes, right? We didn't really report inputs, right, in terms of different instructional strategies that were used. Were there more visual learners and we addressed their needs in a way that we didn't maybe the auditory learners or vice versa. So I did not collect that data here this evening to report to you, but it's a good question to say, you know, what inputs result in these outcomes. That's a good question.
I know these are the biggies and the tested ones and that we, you know, can do a lot of comparisons on. But as well, are we looking at any other trends over time, like for the other high school, like Math 2, Math 3, all those. I mean, do we look at trends if you've got, like, we obviously did well in Math 1. Are we going to follow that through to see if those students continue? I mean, I think it's great that we worry about what we see, but our ultimate goal is what they come out with whenever they leave us and go out into the world. So, do we as a district do any of that to follow through with our students to see what our ultimate goal is? Do we need that?
Right, it's a good question, and one answer to your question is that there will be a new EOC next year, and that is a Math 3 EOC, so that might help us provide a little more of a trend in terms of math outcomes. The next measure I would say would be ACT, a measure of college and career readiness, kind of is designed to capture all of those different things. And then I infer from your question that you're curious about what happens after they graduate and those types of outcomes. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Somewhat, but just to see if we, like, okay, sometimes we have, like you say, we'll have a great year and then the next year will fall off. Right. Obviously, you have groups of students who just perform well one year and then, do they continue on that continuum as they go, or are we as a district doing something to lay the groundwork really well to follow them through to middle school, to high school, to those non-tested subjects later on in high school? So I guess what I'm looking for is, rather than spot checks, so to speak, are we looking at groups of students to see, or subject matter? As Dr. Emery said, we've got a lot of teachers who are doing a great job in Math 1, for instance. Are we giving them the same opportunities at 2 and 3? And I just
sure.
Yeah,
and that's easy to track when we have statewide standardized measures like EOGs and EOCs in place, and where we don't have those, even with our NCFEs, which are designed to measure growth, but they don't give us proficiency data, it's a little more difficult to track in terms of, say, Math 3, for example, or beyond. And so I guess to answer your question is we can do that fairly easily when we administer statewide or even national ACT types of measures. But it's a little more challenging for us when we're, say, looking at teacher tests and things like that to get an accurate comparison.
Wouldn't growth, though, be a sort of subset of that? Because the growth measure is, in fact, while it's aggregate to the district or the school or the grade level or the teacher, it looks at individual growth over time. So while it might not track out by content area, Marilyn, I think being able to look at that over time gives you at least the sense that our kids are growing. Because the point you make is, each of these bars for each year is a different set of kids. So the reality is, as a district, our number might be going up or down, but if we aren't looking at the cohort of the kids, it's hard to know, did we grow them from 3rd to 4th grade? We're comparing last year's 3rd graders to this year's 3rd graders. But growth, in fact, gives us that other measure, which is so you all know when we saw these numbers, we had some hot spots here we could hooray about, but we were a little concerned. And then when the growth numbers came in, they looked completely different from what we anticipated. So I do think EVOS is a way to give us trends. It's certainly trends for each child over time, because their magic formula that none of us know what that is, because that's how they make their money. But so there's an EVOS score tied to the M-class DIBELS and TRC that we do in K through 2, and then there's an EVOS score tied to all these other measures, and so over time you can really get a snapshot of that student's individual growth. Over time you can get a snapshot of that 3rd grade teacher. And to me, that would be one way we could do what you're talking about. It's not as easy to say how in math over time does that look, but.
Now that was my question exactly. Do we continue to grow these students through the years so that whenever they go out, I mean, hopefully they would have made at least a year's growth every year, and that's kind that be our goal with whatever we are doing. well, I think everybody here knows how I feel about proficiency, but I feel real strongly about growth, and to make sure that that's our ultimate goal, is growing children in whatever subject every year, that they make at least a year's growth, if not better. But so, thank you.
That's an important point, right? To look at this, because most of what I've said is the student is or is not proficient. That's kind of a yes or no question, but did they go from a low level 1 to a high level 2? And I think that's an excellent point, right? That's not reported in proficiency data. Yep, yep.
Other questions?
Well, and even in recognizing schools, I know some of you were able to come last week, but even in recognizing schools, we had schools that didn't meet growth, that went from a really negative number to a not so negative. And that is growth. It wasn't enough to meet an indicator. We had schools that met growth that didn't go up. Sometimes they went back a little bit, but they were still within that window. So I think when you go into the dashboard, you'll actually be able to look at those index scores over time. In that 3-year report in particular, you can see what that index score does over time. And that's another way to get at grade levels, schools, subgroups, what does that index look like over time? Because it might be all red, but if it goes from, -6 to -0.6, then you can see there's been growth over time. Aren't we complicated here?
Additional questions, board members of Andy? Thank you so much. So now we're going to, next we will discuss our 2017-18 Title I application.
Good evening, board members, chair, and our superintendent, and our viewing audience. I thought I would give you an overview of our 2017-18 Title I plan, and you should have a PowerPoint. What is Title I? It is now called ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. Used to be No Child Left Behind, used to be ESCA, used to be Chapter 1, has had many names. So we're now at ESSA. So what is Title I? Well, this ESA Act now gives us strong accountability. You just heard a lot of information from Andy Kraft, and we have more accountability. There is increased flexibility from the state and from our district. We have more choices for parents and students in the ESSA Act, and emphasis on evidence-based instructional strategies. The program serves about 21 million children throughout the United States in elementary, middle, and high schools, and the funds are set aside every year to provide extra help to the children who need it the most. And these are our children who don't always fare well on our state assessments. How do schools qualify? As you know, that schools, the federal funds provide these based on a formula that is on census, poverty estimates, and the cost of education in each state. The schools qualify based on economic need according to the number of children that receive free and reduced lunch. As a district, we must rank order all of our schools in order of poverty from the highest to the lowest percentage of low-income children in the schools. How do schools qualify? We have to serve schools down to 75% poverty. Right now, this current year, we're serving students at 56% poverty. Our school allocations are calculated by multiplying the number of low-income students times determined per pupil allocation. This year, we're again serving 43 schools, 28 elementary, 8 middle, 7 high. We serve 6 non-public schools. So we provide some funding to the Children's Home, which is our neglected and delinquent, and also Project Hope, which is our homeless program. We have, when we receive these funds, we have federal requirements. We have to set aside funds for parent involvement initiatives, district initiatives, students who attend private schools, our neglected and delinquent institutions, and our homeless. We also can set aside money for district initiatives. And in our district, we have chosen to set aside money to fund our instructional coaches. We have about 12 to 13 coaches that we provide salaries for. We set aside about $1.5 million for our pre-K program. We serve 26 pre-K classrooms. We also set aside salaries for our parent involvement coordinators. There's also money set aside for professional development for teachers that work in Title I schools. And also, we provide a small amount of money for our 4 focus schools. How does Title I work? Well, in each school, the schools have to identify students most in need of educational help. They set goals in their school improvement plan. They measure student progress. They develop programs that add to regular classroom instruction, and they have to involve parents in all aspects of the program. Title I schools usually offer smaller class sizes, additional teachers and teacher assistants, additional training for instruction, for school staff, a variety of teaching methods and materials, and workshops and classes for parents. Every school has to create a school improvement plan based on their comprehensive needs assessment. And as most of you know, our schools are using a program provided by the state, NC STAR. This school-wide program is revised each year by our administrators, teachers, and parents. So now we talk about the money. So exactly how much money did we get this year? We received $20 million, which is an increase of about $2 million. We're still serving, as we said earlier, 43 schools, pre-K through 12th grade, and we use these monies to fund our instructional areas. That would be reading, math, and science. We can serve other areas, but we're looking at serving the whole child. We have a little over 22,000 eligible students and 66 students that attend private schools. As you can see on our last page, our school allocation, with the $20 million, we sent $17.9 million out to the schools. We try to make sure the schools have 85% to 100% of what they received the previous year. We set aside about $1.1 million for the Title I administration, employees in the Title I department. Our district initiatives, which include the 12 instructional coaches, professional development, and focus schools, was $1.6 million. Our parent involvement, we have to set aside a little bit for parent involvement for each school. That's about $186,000. Non-public schools came to $63,000. Our neglected and delinquent was $33,000. Project Hope, $75,000. And we had about $2 million in carryover funds. So we use that. We have about $24 million that we have used this year to provide to our schools. Any questions?
I do have,
Yes.
have one question.
Yes.
I know we're trying really hard to get more of our parents involved in the school.
Yes.
And when I see the 186,000, are you seeing more parents getting involved, grandparents? Can you tell me a little something, and I hope it's good, about the improvement of parent involvement?
Yes. We've been using a lot of social media to get the attention of our parents. As a matter of fact, I tweeted I think it was this past Saturday, I was driving by Parkland High School, and there was a sign outside the marquee said Parent Forum, and I was so glad to see something other than just parent meeting. Here we're having a parent forum, and we're inviting our parents out. We have what we call an EFECT program, where our schools are divided into sections, and the elementary, middle, and high school, they come together and they have different forums for our parents. We have these parent involvement sessions, where parent power sessions, where Title I is participating in every one of those parent power sessions, and we're trying to make sure that we get our parents on board. And as I said, we're using social media to make sure we have a Twitter page now. We're getting ready to design a Facebook page, because we don't want to have it a place for parents to complain, but more of an informational page so they'll know what's going on in the district. But we've seen a lot of increase in our parents visiting the schools. I think most of you saw we had lots of males volunteering the first day of school. Those males are continuing to go back into the school, so that's a big plus for us.
Patsy, to that question, the dollars for parent involvement that Lyda referenced, the 186, that's really just programming. Can you explain where the parent involvement coordinators, because I know some of that is
That's
district,
different.
and there's also some of that in the individual school in that
Right.
17.9 as well. So
Right.
that number, I just didn't want
Right.
you to think that number was the only investment in parent
Right.
involvement in this plan.
If you go back to one of the slides, let me see if I can get back to it. I put it off, didn't I? The slide that says district initiatives, 1.6 million. We also include the parent involvement coordinator salary, which is about 500,000. That's included in that amount. We only pay about 50% of the salary set aside for the parent involvement coordinators. And the amount here, 186 for the parent involvement, is every school gets a allocation based on per pupil. So I think we're doing very well trying to make sure that we're reaching our parents.
Yes, I was noticing on the Title I eligibility where it serves schools down to 56% poverty, which is basically our district poverty rate. So the only schools that don't get Title I funding are the ones that are actually wealthier than our district. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I guess my question is, we have certain schools that are consistently really struggling. Would it be useful for them to be getting more of this money?
They do we have to rank order the schools, and the schools that are most neediest get more of the money.
Okay, and how is that?
How do we rank
Is
order?
it by student?
By poverty.
By poverty
So it's
level?
exactly
in each
what you're
school.
saying, Elizabeth. We
Yes.
take those first, so the highest per pupil, when Dr. Patsy mentioned this is a per pupil formula, that amount per pupil changes. and
As
it-
the percentage goes
Yes.
down?
Right, it
Yes.
decreases as it goes down.
Good.
And to piggyback on that, that percentage changes each year depending on our
Yes,
poverty level. So
yes.
every year you have to recalculate that
Right,
whole formula
right,
and all that. And,
right.
and different schools get different amounts
Right,
each year
right.
dependent, correct?
Yes,
And,
ma'am.
and do people revisit how they're spending that
Oh,
money
yes.
every year?
Part of their federal requirements is that they have to evaluate their school improvement plan, and that's what, the plans will be turned in September 30th. Title I also has to revisit those plans and make sure they're meeting what we call the 10 school-wide components, and they have to make sure that they are evaluating their program and that they're basing their program on data, that their school improvement plan is data-driven. And we've been doing a very good job of that for about the past 2 years, just really focusing on what's in those plans.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question.
Anyone else?
Okay.
Okay?
The private schools,
Yes, ma'am.
I was noticing on our, where we're gonna vote, I just don't remember. Tell me how that works. Do they have, so they designate their high poverty children that they have within that school? Is that something that a private school they have to take the initiative to do that? Is that
We
correct?
have a meeting each year. It's usually the third week in March, and we invite all of the private schools in this district to that meeting, and we invite all of our specialists, EC, Title II, Title III, all of us come together and meet with those persons, and usually we only have about 6 schools that want to participate, but we have to go back, we invite the schools, if they say they want to participate, then they have to send us those student addresses. Those student addresses are in one of our Title I school areas. We can provide funding. Now, we don't actually give them money. We serve them by services. So they may have tutoring in their school. Title I would pay for the tutor.
Okay, so
Yes.
that just follows
Yeah.
that individual child in.
Yes.
And you don't give them the money, you
No.
pay it directly to a tutor that would
Right,
come or
right,
whatever. It doesn't
right,
go directly to that
Right.
school.
And they
Okay.
may ask for materials. All those materials have to be marked, cataloged, and only the students that are Title I eligible can receive
Can use
those products and services.
All right, thank you. I don't,
Anyone else?
And Dr. Squire, I guess what
Yes.
I want to ask, and once again, I think you're doing a great job.
Thank
Big
you.
responsibility, I don't want to say but, and when I look at, we get, is it $20 million
Yes.
from Title I from the federal government?
Yes.
I guess my question is, and maybe you've already answered it, but how do we connect the money that comes in plus the programs and the results? You know, you got money, programs,
Right,
people,
right,
results.
right.
Because when I look at Title I, if I understand it, these programs, the monies, the salaries are going to help probably some of our kids to have the most opportunity.
Yes.
And just help me out. You can help me out, Dr. Emery. How do we connect the dots? $20 million coming in. We've got programs. We've got positions. What are the results are we getting?
What we've been looking at this past year is we have, as you have said, vendors that come in and provide services. Well, we are asking our research department to do studies to determine which programs are effective, which programs, most of the schools already know that they have to use programs that have a record of demonstrated effectiveness. Their superintendents are doing a good job of questioning them and getting information as to how is this program going to help your school, and we're going to be looking at those results every year. So we have at least 2 or 3 studies that we have recently received from our research department. That's we've talked about iReady, which is a program that's been used in a lot of our Title I schools, and we've been looking at that data. So now we'll also be looking at some vendors such as Raymond Jones. There are several vendors that the schools are using, so they research department will be looking closely at those programs.
Okay, and if I can make a request, because I know we've sent a presentation on Title I. Once again, a lot of stuff, it's a lot of programs, a lot of things are going on. But I think what I would like to see is maybe drill down just a little bit and say, hey, we've got this amount of money, and we've done our research, we've done our study, but here are the 3 or 4 programs that we see making a difference, whether it's a program, whether it's computer software, whether it's parents, more parental involvement, just something tangible.
We will definitely do that.
All right.
We're looking for evidence-based research practices that make a difference.
I did want to add, before we finished, a compliment that goes along with this discussion. We set out early this year, well before we had our allotment from the federal government for Title I, to look at how do we eliminate duplication. And so Dr. Squire worked with the ISs and Dr. Nail, and the work that was done to sort of seamlessly tie NC STAR, the comprehensive needs assessment, and the budgets that schools were asking for, we've never done before. I think this is the first time we've really been able to accomplish that. And what I would tell you, Robert, is we can look at some data, but these connections will put us in a place we've never been before to be able to draw that line very seamlessly between the CNA, NC STAR, what happens all year, where did you invest your money, and then what indicators at the end. And I don't want you to think we don't have some indicators, because we have actually looked at some of these, what we've looked at as the most commonly used programs. So your instructional superintendents this year also went back and said, if you've used this program for more than 2 years and you can't show, then don't bring it. We don't want to see it again, right? Or it got used here with good results and it got used over here with not so good results. What's the difference? So then one of the ISs may have said, you're not implementing this the way it was intended to be implemented. So we may give you 1 more year to look at implementation, and then if it doesn't work, so I think this team has worked exceptionally well together to really guard this investment, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without their collaboration. I think our plans have been looked at in more detail than ever before. There's been conferencing with principals about the budgets, the plans, and I feel really good. I feel better than I ever have about how we're investing these dollars this year.
I agree.
And I think that helps me out because that's what I'm looking for. Once again, I think you're doing a great job, but just connecting all of the dots. You know, once again, you got Title I money and other monies that are out there that are dealing with, I think, majority, minority students. And then when you look at the other part of the information where we're taking some steps to close the gap, but we still got a significant gap, how does this pot of money and how does this program helps us with closing that gap with the students? So next year, year after next, we can say, yes, we had this money, we had this, and we're better.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy.
Not to belabor the point, but I do want to say one more positive thing. We know we've talked a lot about the class size legislation and the challenges of it. One of the unintended positive consequences of the class size legislation is that many of our Title I schools were using their school allocations to lower class size and buy teachers. And because they now have the teachers in the allotment, it has freed them up to invest those in supplies, materials, other ways to support kids, whether that's tutoring or so. I do think it's important where we find the good in these things that we say. So it has been really helpful to a lot of our Title I elementary schools to have that class size legislation. It has freed up Title I dollars for them.
Additional comments on Title I? Okay, we will move on to our Building and Grounds Committee report. Ms. Lyda Calvert-Hayes.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you. We have some in this room right now that have been up, I think, since maybe 2 o'clock this morning, checking to see how our roads are, our buses, because of the wind and the storm that we have. And I just want to say a special thank you to the ones that are with our bus maintenance, and also I think Daryl, I see you over there sleepy. I think that you were up also. So just a special thank you for all that y'all do. We had discussions tonight. We talked about an easement, which is the South Mill Creek outfall replacement, and that is a small easement that we have been talking to the city about. We also talked about, which I find exciting because I'm an entrepreneur, about approval for a community coffee shop, of which our students are going to be running. So that will be coming out soon, and I think that'll be a wonderful, wonderful program, and a wonderful program for our students to learn about small businesses. We also talked about Conoke, and we had a general contractor to come in who was low bidder, so we were able to talk to him, and also we had Colin and we had Daryl and Bill to give us a lot of information on the bids and what had happened with our low bidder. We talked about Parkland traffic, and we talked about Northwest Boulevard. As you know, in our bond, we have that covered, and we are looking at safety, and we're looking at better ways to be able to redirect traffic, and especially safety for our kids, so that we know more about how to control the traffic flow. We talked about the temporary construction at Lowrance and Paisley, and we also talked about an easement there. So we've been busy for the last 2 weeks. We feel like we've really gotten things moving along. We've got one school that is under construction, and it won't be long before we'll have another one under construction. So thanks to all for your help. And again, I'll make it short so that Daryl and the rest of you can get in bed early.
Thank you, Lyda. That concludes our discussion items for this evening, and we move into action items. The first item for action will be the consider approval of the 2017-18 Title I application. Do I have a motion? Vice Chairman Barr, second Mr. Johnson. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. Consider approval of the Conoke General Contractor selection. Do I have a motion to approve?
Could I please abstain from that?
Yes, we will note that you will abstain from voting.
So moved.
Okay. I have a motion by Ms. Motzinger. Do I have a second? Second. Ms. Taylor. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? So motion carries. Ms. Calvert-Hayes David Singletary and Dana Jones voted against the motion, and Ms. Calvert-Hayes did not vote. Next we have, motion carries. Next we have consider approval of the Parkland traffic schematic design. Do I have a motion to approve? Ms. Taylor, second. Ms. Parker, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Next, consider approval of the Parkland traffic, Next, consider approval of the Northwest Boulevard schematic design. Do I have a motion to approve? Okay, Mr. Singletary and second, Mr. Johnson. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Consider approval of the Lawrence Paisley temporary construction easement. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Calvert-Hayes, second. Mr. Singletary, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Consider approval of the all-source recruiting group contract for speech pathology services. Do I have a motion to approve? Ms. Taylor, do I have a second? Second. Mr. Singletary, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Next, consider approval of the educational-based services contract for speech pathology services. Do I have a motion to approve? Mr. Johnson, do I have a second? Second. Ms. Clark, any discussion? All in favor? Consider approval of the Weaver Speech Services contract for speech pathology services. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Ms. Calvert-Hayes, second. Ms. Parker, any discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. That concludes our action items. We go to our consent agenda items. We have 2 items, minutes from the August 22nd, 2017 meeting, and approval of the general personnel report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. Singletary, second. Mr. Johnson, all in favor? Motion carries. Wonderful. Do we have any speakers signed up? Okay, well, it looks like we have no other business before us this evening. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Ms. Calvert-Hayes, second. Mr. Varr, all in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's a good one.
Thank you for joining us on your school channel, Cable 2.